So next, please welcome Merlijn, who will talk about his Debian-based mobile OS.
Better? Okay, great. Okay, yeah, so my name is Merlijn, or Merlijn in Dutch. And I'm here to present Maemo Leste. And the title says Mobile Hacker OS, and it means hacker in the sense of free software hacker, right? So people who like to take things apart and come up with interesting solutions, not as in a mobile phone OS to break into computer systems. So I'll briefly tell you first what Maemo Leste is and why we started working on it, and then I'll give you a history of how we got to this point and where we basically started our project. I'll give you an overview of the components of the system, how they work, what our current status is, any current recent news, and then where we plan to go from here, and of course how people can help. So first, what is Maemo Leste? It is a mobile OS for phones and tablets. So for example, I have a phone here. It's a relatively old phone from 2012 from Motorola, and it runs the latest Linux version that you can download from kernel.org. And it runs the latest Debian version, Debian Bullseye or Devuan Chimera. In this case, we run it on Devuan, but it's basically synchronized with Debian. It just doesn't have systemd. Obviously, it running on Debian and Devuan means that it's GNU Linux, so it runs the GNU user space and the Linux kernel. So in essence, it's like a laptop that's in your pocket, but in form factor of a phone. We've been working on it since 2017, so it's been 5.5 years, I think, at this point. And our goals are really to make it kind of a pure Linux experience, so we don't use old Android kernels that are 5 years old and not maintained. So, like I said, if you go to the Linux kernel website, you download the kernel, you can run it on this phone. And again, we really focus on freedom, hackability. If you want Tor or WireGuard integrated on the phone, no problem. You just apt-get install it, and that's it. You know, if you want different file systems, if you want to toy with it, that you can do all of that. Currently, you can already use it as a daily driver on various phones, but there's definitely still some rough edges in the user experience. But I've been using it for months now. I'm probably not the best one to judge user experience because I worked with people on it, but you know, it works. I can call people and all of that's pretty nice. So why do we actually do it, right? Because there's a few other projects now that are doing similar things, but we started with this because well, me specifically, I didn't want to switch to Android. I still had the original Nokia phone from 2009. I still have it in my pocket, it still works. And I didn't want to run Apple iOS or Android because most of them are not fully open, and there's all these applications that send a lot of data everywhere, and I kind of want to know what they're doing. And I think the whole monopoly with Apple and Google basically being the only two players and being big companies that make money gathering data is not a good thing. So we wanted something else that people who agreed with that philosophy could use. So in that sense, it's meant to be, you know, open, hackable, and not locked down. And we'd like to see that it's viable to have a completely open source phone that doesn't have any applications that track data. It's just community developed applications for the community. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Maemo before this talk. Can you raise your hand if you have? Okay, there's a few. I'll give some brief background. So I think 2007 and a bit before that, Nokia was working on these not phones but internet tablets, they called them. So they were a bit bigger than this, and you could use them to connect to wireless and browse the internet. They had a very basic Firefox-based browser. And those were the Nokia 770, 800, and the 810. And those all ran Maemo. There were older versions of Maemo than what we started working on, but they were Maemo nonetheless, and those were also based on Debian. So they were a very old version of Debian running Linux, and some of the parts were open source, not everything. But basically this was like a communicator tablet that Nokia made. And then in the later version, the Nokia N900, which is what I'm holding here, they added a modem. So then suddenly you had 2G, 3G, GPS, and you could browse the internet on a mobile data connection. And again, this is also running Debian. And I still use this phone today as well, and it still works. There's a lot of problems with it now, but you can still call people. And after that, Nokia started collaborating with Intel, and I think they came up with MeeGo, which was also actually a pretty nice phone operating system. And after that, the top executives stopped all their own mobile efforts, and they made them switch to Windows Mobile, which I don't think worked out. But before Nokia really pushed away Maemo, they gave away many of the rights to the Maemo Foundation, which still holds these rights. So this allows us to work on it without having any issues with Nokia. And to date, this phone is still maintained by the community. Sometimes there's some security fixes, some other updates, but it has really died down. But a couple of years ago, you still got updates for this phone pretty regularly. But not everything was open source, and that's part of what we tried to fix, because the people who work on it, me included, really like the operating system on this phone. So what we set out to do is take all the open source code, port it to the newer frameworks, and take all the closed source code and figure out how we can replace it. Do we just throw it away entirely, write a replacement? Do we figure out how we can replace it? Do we kind of replicate it bit by bit, but not exactly? And these two links provide, a long time ago, they provided a list of what was not free on Maemo. And of course, that list doesn't apply to us. It's just a very useful list, because everything we have is open source. Okay, so I think I've already explained some of the idea here, which is Maemo Fermento, the original Nokia Maemo. They got a lot of things right, but it was very hard to port some of it because it was closed source. So again, our idea was to open source everything we have, so everything that runs on my phone, you can download the source, build it on the phone if you want to. But we wanted to stay API compatible, because there's a lot of, there was a very vibrant community around the Nokia phones at the time. So a lot of people made tile maps, calculators, special calendars, note applications, games, whatever. And we kind of wanted to be able to just compile them for our own operating system, and then have that, as a starting set of applications for people. Yeah, so that's basically the idea. We try to rely as much as possible on the standard desktop protocols interfaces that Linux has. So we use dbus for communication, which is a system-wide bus for sending messages, requesting information. So if you want to connect to a wireless connection, typically that happens over dbus these days, or at least when you click on something, there's a signal sent over dbus, and then something connects to the wireless. We use the standard gconf and gsettings for storing settings of the phone. And then UDEF and FDEF and IO sensor proxy are the various hooks that we use into the kernel to get various events. So for example, if I take the phone and I open the slider, that generates an event, because then the slider input device, which is an actual input device, says, oh yeah, I opened up, and then when I close it, the screen turns off again, because we hooked it up in such a way. The IO sensor proxy is mostly for sensors. So for example, if I'm not sure if I can show it. Yeah, I probably can. So if I hold the phone like this, if I turn it, then it should rotate, right? And that's pretty simple, but I'm just trying to explain why we use these. And the same is true for a sensor here. If you hold it to your ear when you're calling, then it turns off the screen and disables any input, so you don't press buttons with your ear. We use pulse audio for the audio. That's I guess currently still the right thing to use, and Nokia used it way back then, but we're looking at switching to Pipewire, which is a newer audio server. We've looked at supporting MPRIS. I don't know how to properly pronounce it, but basically this is a nice way, like if you hook up Bluetooth and other things, it's a nice way to to play media, to stop media from playing, or if you connect it to your car, you can have the media player transmit the title and other things to the car, and then if you press a button in the car, the phone receives it. And all of this actually works on the phone. I've done it in my car, but it's not properly packaged yet. And then further down, we use UPower to get any information on the battery, whether the phone is plugged into the power or not. and U-disks for any information about the SD cards typically. And then on the Wi-Fi side, we use WPA supplicant, which might not surprise people because it's the standard thing that everyone uses on Linux for Wi-Fi still, but Nokia didn't use it, so we had to actually rewrite a lot of Maemo that Nokia wrote to use WPA supplicant. And the same is true for the modem driver, so the thing that connects to the mobile network that lets you call, it needs a driver because typically software speaks AT to the modem, but that kind of differs per modem, so if you want to support more than one phone, you kind of need an abstraction layer around it. And again, Nokia had their own, which was closed source, so we didn't use it. And instead we use Ophono, which is the framework, as an abstraction around that. There's also a daemon for infrared. Some of the phones have infrared receivers and transmitters. And we use the standard Bluetooth software. Porting older Maemo codes mostly involved dealing with basically what I showed on the previous slide, but then getting rid of all of it. So for example, HAL, I'm not sure, does anyone remember HAL here? One person. So it's the hardware abstraction layer 10, 15 years ago, and it was replaced by all the other things that I wrote here after the presentation. So a lot of the Maemo code we had to take apart and put it back together to basically get exactly the same information, but in a different way, because we as a community decided to do it differently. And then we ported various widget sets, so the user interfaces, the libraries you use to create programs. Those are typically GTK and Qt. And we had to port a lot of the Maemo stuff from Qt4 to Qt5 because there was a newer version and Debian no longer had Qt4. So we needed to port everything to Qt5, and that was actually a significant effort because Nokia had a lot of custom stuff in Qt to make it look nice on mobile. And we're going to do the same for the other, which is at GTK, but that's going to be a larger effort, and right now we're still very happy with GTK2 because Debian still has it, so we don't have to do any work, it just works. Whatever other code depended on the close parts, we of course had to get rid of them or replace them otherwise. A lot of the work was already done for us before we started by the Maemo community seamless software update effort. So there was, even after Nokia disappeared, there was the community trying to maintain the phone, and they reverse engineered a lot of stuff because otherwise they couldn't maintain it, right? It's closed source, you can't fix it. And then a lot of other problems we had was mostly with the drivers, 3D acceleration, just to make the phone a little bit smooth, you really need to use the graphics driver, and if it doesn't work, that's a problem. So that alone probably took over half a year. Most of our packages are built on a continuous integration service, and we use Jenkins. So basically, it's a system where when someone makes a code change, they make it a new version, they click a button, and then if everything goes right, the package just ends up in the phone repository, and then if people click update on their phone, they can get the new package. The build servers are currently running at home, at my place, but the actual server serving the packages is elsewhere. We use a KGP D16 computer running LibreBoot as BIOS, and the Honeycomb is doesn't run a free BIOS, I think, but it's an ARM64 computer, so we can compile things quickly. Okay, so this is a long slide basically showing off what we think works well enough. So the phone has a virtual keyboard. This might sound funny, but many of the phones that I have currently in my pocket, they actually have a hardware keyboard, so you don't need a virtual keyboard most of the time because you just open it. But we have a virtual keyboard for the phones that don't have a physical keyboard. Wireless works, 2G, 3G, and LTE or 4G works depending on whether the phone supports it or not. Audio, playing music, ringtones that work, charging, alarms. I've been using it every day to wake up, and so far I haven't missed any appointments, so it seems to work. The browsing is very basic. We have a browser from the Qt project, but we haven't done much with it, so you can browse, but it doesn't support bookmarks or remembering passwords or anything like that, so we'll really have to work on that. USB works. We have the whole context application for Maemos. You can import contacts, you can export them, you can synchronize them to Nextcloud or something else that supports CalDAV. And of course, finally, SMS and calls on the devices where the modem works. This should work as well. The user interface isn't perfect, but I've been happily using it. And as I said before, the things that we're currently still really working on is a better user interface for calls and SMS, and a UI for chatting in many different protocols. Part of what Maemo did really well, in my opinion, is that you had the same interface, the same program for Skype, for software, for soft phones, so IP calls, for XMPP Jabber calls, for regular phones. It was all the same program. And your context simply had all these different things. So you don't run a Skype program on your phone. No, you just have something that knows how to talk to the Skype servers, and then you use the same program. And I really like that. So we're trying to do the same here. It does mean that sometimes you don't get all the features that you would normally get from a native client. But I'm not sure if that's necessarily going to be a big problem. As of writing right now, XMPP works, IRC works. I had Matrix working at some point. The IP phone SAP works. I've used Slack on the phone as well. Telegram I haven't done yet, but basically, you know, it can really work. And the UI for this is still being worked on. We have normal chats working, but group chats still need a bit more user design work. We're still working on better power management. Some of the phones you can get with the old batteries, you can get 2 days of battery life, just having it on all the time, which I'm actually very happy with. But if we do, with more work, I think we can get it to 5 or 6 days. Of course, this really depends on the device. Not every phone has a good power management. Not every phone has well-supported power management. Recently, we've been working on documentation. So currently at this URL, but probably later somewhere else, also we have a user guide. So someone's been working away on a user guide for quite a while, and it's shaping up to be quite nice. And we actually really need this as a project because if people come from Android, then they don't really understand how the UI works, which makes sense because, you know, they've mostly used Android at this point. If you do want to check out the UI, we have a stand also upstairs, and I have many phones and tablets there that you can check out. Camera support is still lacking, so it only works on one of the phones that we support. And finally, we also want to support some more devices. We've had funding in the past that helped us really propel the effort forward by Nelnet in 2019. They're a Dutch nonprofit, and by the DAPSI project, which is part of the Next Generation Internet European Union Fund. And last year we applied for more funding to work on some of the things I outlined previously, and we received it. So that was great, and we're hoping to sometime at the end of this year fulfill all the things that we said we would do. These are all the devices that currently are supported. So the Nokia 900, of course, is the first phone that Nokia ran the version of Maemo on that we use. It's a very old hardware, but it does work, and we kind of want to keep it working just to show that our OS is actually very lightweight and fast, and it can still run on this device. But to give you an indication, I think normally phones, if you buy a new phone now, even a cheap one, it probably has 30 to 40 times more RAM than this one. This one has only 256 megabytes of RAM. So if you start up modern Firefox, basically, it's already game over. But you can make phone calls and do all the other stuff pretty well. The Pine phone we support, which is an effort in the last couple of years to make a community platform for making Linux phones. So there's other projects out there like us that also support the Pine phone. It's quite nice, but the power management is not that great. So it gets kind of hot, and you have to do some clever things to make it last for a day or two. The Motorola Droid 4 Bionic and some other phones like those are quite well supported by our project, and it's also the one I use on a daily basis. And then the Raspberry Pi and other all-winner boards like the A20 line board from Molimax, all of them you can use as a testing device or as a tablet at home. But you know, it's not something you carry in your pocket, but it can be nice for toying around or making something in a car. We're still working on supporting the Nokia N9, which is a device that came after the Nokia N100. The Motorola Droid 4, I had a proof of concept working, but it still froze sometimes, so it's not useful on a day-to-day basis. Various other phones like the Droid Razr, HX2, and the Moto G4, all those phones are also being worked on as part of the Nelnet funding. And finally, there's a couple tablets that we are also working on. And actually, almost everything works except for one tiny chip that is the part of the display bridge, so you don't actually see anything on display yet. But everything else works. Okay, I'll very briefly go over some of the devices so you can kind of get an idea what they look like. Of course, I've held them up a couple times, and you can check them up upstairs. But basically, this is a Droid 4. This is, I guess, our most well-supported device because all developers use it regularly, and it has a keyboard, so that's kind of nice. They're like $20 on eBay. They're quite cheap. It runs Linux 6.1 with additional 3D patches. Battery life is several days. Well, I've talked about the keyboard, and basically everything that you would want really works. So 3D acceleration, wireless, battery, touchscreen, keyboard, etc. And if people are interested after this talk, we have some devices that we can give to you if you want to help out with the project, if you're interested, if you want to try it out. So let me know, and I can try to arrange that. I don't have them here, but I can send them via post. Nokia 900, mostly the same. It's just old hardware. But the audio calls are, as of last week, finally working. Yeah, I've mentioned the PinePhone before. It's more powerful than the other phones, but the power management is not great. The nice thing that it does have, though, is it has various kill switches on the phone, which means that if you want to make sure that your modem is really turned off, you can just flip a switch and the modem has no more power. So that's it. You're sure that the phone is not listening to you. You can find more specifications on the PinePhone website, and you can also buy it there. And this is what the prototype looked like initially. I worked with them, as did the rest of the community, when they were building the phone. And they sent me one of their early development kits. So the battery would go here. This is the system on chip, and then I think this is the modem. And then, there was a screen on the other side, and this is what the phone ended up looking like later. And of course, this one, I think, had an Ethernet port. Yeah, and then there's various all-winner devices, which is a system-on-chip company that makes ARM chips for phones and tablets, usually cheap ones. And we support a lot of them because the community around Linux supports them. And of course, if you want to run this on a virtual machine, like an Intel virtual machine, you can do it. You can run it on your laptop, and that's how I do most of my development. And you can even connect a 4G modem over USB, and test all of the other stuff that way. Wrapping up, the milestones that we've reached so far, I'm actually quite happy with. I did a similar talk about this about 4 or 5 years ago, and these were all the milestones we wanted to reach. And so we've now actually done it. The main one is, of course, to start using it on a daily basis. So don't use my old phone and only use this one. See what we run into. There's various community packages now. It's not that many, but I think 30 or 40. So it's still, there's some people that are using it and contributing packages. We also support the PinePhone quite well now. The N900 calls are finally working, and way back when, the Droid 4 phone didn't even have a working GPU, so everything was really quite slow and used a lot of power. We finished most of the user interfaces around the modem, 3G, 2G, enter your PIN, we cannot connect to the network, that kind of stuff. And we have a fully featured contacts library and application now. Yeah, what's next? We would like to get to the point where we have devices that work without any changes to the mainline Linux kernel. For some of these devices, it's very hard because the GPU driver is not something they're willing to accept, because it has one closed source user space part. That's only true for the Motorola phones. We'd like to work on full disk encryption, and Postmarket OS, I think, have done a pretty decent job with that. That's another project I will mention just at the end. So maybe we can just collaborate with them and basically do what they did, so that we don't have to invent it ourselves. But the idea would be that when you start your phone or when you lock your phone, you have a certain code that will then encrypt will then unlock your storage. So whenever someone takes your phone, they don't know the code, they cannot decrypt your phone. we have a lot more ideas and issues on GitHub, where we have our bug checker with our milestones and issues. But generally, we still would very much like to see more people join the effort and help out. And yeah, if you have funny ideas or things you want to do with the phone, we're generally very open to cool ideas. So once more, we're now in the beta stage. Personally, I find it very powerful to have Linux in my pocket. Debian, I can apt-get install any package that's in Debian, and usually it works. That's very different from most of the other things that you try. It's been a lot of fun over the years. We have several devices that work now, so that's that you can actually just buy the phone, flash it, flash the SD card, and it should work. But we still need to do a lot more documentation and organization. And as I said before, we have a stand upstairs, so please come by if you have questions or if you want to check it out. And we have a lot of cool propaganda stickers that I think you will enjoy. Finally, I put it on the same slide here. There's some other efforts that if you like this, you should check out. Postmarket.os is one of them. I think I should have written it with a lowercase p, but I hope they'll forgive me. Basically, they are trying to make Linux run on as many phones as possible. So if you had an old Android phone and it was no longer supported, they might support it. And their idea is not to make it run completely on Linux, like the newest version ultimately, but just to be able to use your phone at all with Linux, even though it's a much older Android version. And they support a lot more devices than we do for this reason. Mobian, I think, is another project that's based on Debian, which is also very cool, and they use a different interface that was developed in the last 2 or 3 years by a commercial company called Purism. And UBports is the old Ubuntu Touch project maintained by the community. That's it. We have IRC, a mailing list, and all these other links. Thank you very much. Any questions? When? It's upstairs next to their stand, where the game with the LEDs and the buttons, where we're sitting very close there. Do you have a question?
Is this your daily job or something like this? Is this related to what you do?
Actually, it's not. No, I work for the Internet Archive as a day job, and this is just a hobby project for the late nights or the weekends or that kind of stuff.
But you get some experience from it that you can use.
Yeah, and we do pay some people to work on it, but I don't pay myself from the funding to work on it. Well, no, I did pay myself from funding, but typically, yeah. Yes.
Sorry, I learned 10 minutes ago. I've been using Maemo for before 15 years, so I made 24 C bindings for Qt libraries on Maemo. Now I'm interested, why do you migrate to GTK 24? Qt to GTK or Qt GTK2 to GTK3?
So Maemo had both GTK2 and Qt4, so we want to be able to support Qt going forward with Qt5. And we're currently still on GTK2, but maybe I didn't get the question.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, yeah, if you have more questions, please. Well, the Qt5 port was actually quite hard because they reworked a lot of it, and yeah. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.